The 2022 Academy Awards are taking place tonight, which means it's about time I ranked the Best Picture nominees. This year's roster is quite the spread, ranging from movies that broke my heart and owned my soul to movies that greatly underwhelmed me. Rankings are always difficult for me since there's usually a couple movies that I like or dislike on very similar levels, so in those cases, I just go with my gut, which means this ranking is obviously subjective. These are just my opinions on these 10 movies, so if I loved something you hated, or I hated something you loved, it's all good, no big deal, we can still be friends. Good? Good. Please don't yell at me or I will cry. That's not a threat, it's a promise. Okay, let's get into it. Don't Look Up follows two astrophysicists who, after discovering that a world-ending asteroid is heading straight towards Earth, try to warn people of the threat, which is unsuccessful for them. Don't Look Up employs a premise that could be intriguing, but in the end doesn't really amount to anything special. Everything is a little bit too on the nose to the point where it's sort of eye-roll worthy. I don't necessarily disagree that any of this stuff would happen, but the way it's presented is bland and uninteresting. Social media plays a big role in Don't Look Up, and all of it feels a little bit like someone went into a coma around 2013, then woke up and wrote this movie with that level of knowledge of the internet. It's painfully outdated and cringeworthy is what I'm trying to say. I think movies like Don't Look Up prove that if you're trying to incorporate something as fickle as the internet into your story, you really need to know what you're talking about, because you mess it up and it's the only thing on the minds of your viewers, taking the wind out of whatever else your movie is trying to do. Speaking of whatever else this movie is trying to do, it's not much. I get what they were going for, okay? It's a commentary and critique on our modern society and yada yada yada, but it just feels a little bit empty. The movie doesn't offer anything new to the conversation or try to explain the actions we're seeing. It only observes. And a movie that observes our society can be good, but I don't think it would be nearly as powerful as one that observes but also analyzes. Why do people act the way they do? A movie that observes human behavior and also asks questions about it is infinitely more interesting, because we get to explore the underlying meanings behind actions we know so well. Whether or not we actually get concrete answers is a different story, but at least try. Don't Look Up stops at observing. And not only that, but it observes in the most obnoxious way possible. The movie is yelling, and not much else. I think Kristen Runquist summed it up as 2 hours of someone shouting at you about a problem you didn't even cause, yet not offering any solutions of their own. And, yeah, that's pretty accurate. Don't Look Up is fun to watch in the moment, I guess, but if I had my way, it wouldn't be on this list. It also has some of the worst editing I've seen in a while, which means it'll probably win Best Editing. Belfast chronicles the ups and downs of the day-to-day lives of a young boy and his family in the politically tumultuous time of late 1960s Ireland. I had high hopes for Belfast. I mean, it seems like something that's right up my alley. I love stories about family and growing up and domestic life with heavier themes, and Belfast has all of that. But from the fact that I've placed Belfast at 9 out of 10 on this list, you can likely tell that I was greatly underwhelmed by it. Belfast could have been great, but there were just one too many missteps that prevented it from being so. The movie brings up some genuinely serious themes that could have been powerful to explore. Political unrest, religious divides, immigration, having to leave everything you've ever known, grim realities of the world that we don't notice as children. These are very real and important themes, but the movie never lingers on any one long enough to actually delve into it. Belfast moves at a breakneck speed. There's never enough breathing room between scenes and moments to let the viewer sit with what's just happened, and as a result, those would-be powerful themes blend together into nothing, leading to watered-down ideas and a major lack of emotion. So many conversations seem to end prematurely, bringing up the important idea and then cutting away from it before we can get into the conversation. And I'm not opposed to cutting away from a difficult moment for dramatic effect. I think it can be really impactful if we understand the gravity of that moment and if we eventually do return to it. But Belfast fails to properly express those emotions, or to return to any topic satisfyingly, and it's a real shame. Show me how difficult it is to explain to your child why they have to leave their home. Show the desire to protect the people you love, both from the perspective of the parents and the children. Make those themes sink in rather than just leaving them to float up on top. Belfast feels more like an introduction to these difficult conversations rather than a meaningful look at them. Belfast lacks both narratively and visually. The black and white cinematography could have been beautiful, but is instead often flat and uninteresting. And I understand that the cinematography wouldn't be as dramatic as something like The Lighthouse, because oh my god, but it could have been better than the washed out visuals we did get. All in all, Belfast was unfortunately a letdown on all fronts, but the kid Jude Hill is adorable and deserves the world. Nightmare Alley follows an opportunistic grifter as he swindles his way through New York City's wealthy elite in an attempt to make as much money as possible, an ambition that may turn dangerous. Right off the bat, I want to say that Nightmare Alley looks fantastic. Every frame in this movie is stunning, from the blue-white snowy nights to the streets bathed in neon signs to the hotel rooms illuminated in crackling yellow-orange lamplight. It's dramatic and stylish and really embodies the neo-noir vibes this story is going for. It's just a shame that the movie is as lackluster as it is. Like Belfast, I was excited for Nightmare Alley. Not only was I blown away by the visuals, like I mentioned, but the story itself is another one that seems like it was made for me. If you don't know, I love crime. Well, I don't... I love crime movies. I'm not just sitting in my house loving crime. No. Okay, you know what I mean. I love crime movies, specifically ones that are heavily stylized the way Nightmare Alley is. The movie has an interesting premise, but something about its execution falls flat for me. It's a little too slow and a little too thematic to be interesting, and that's coming from someone who loves slow and thematic stories. In fact, if Belfast moves too quickly for its themes to be meaningful, Nightmare Alley's brand of slow doesn't so much as let you sit with the themes as it does forcefully dunk you into a vat of theme with a capital T until it's clogging your sinuses. Nightmare Alley was not fun for me to watch. It felt like a lot of waiting around for the next thing to happen and trying to figure out how each element added to a theme that should have been simple to understand yet felt overly convoluted. Nightmare Alley sort of felt like the first draft of this story, in the sense that it could have been cleaned up and polished to result in something really great. And in my opinion, it never does find its footing. It starts off weirdly slow and continues in that way until suddenly the movie's over, despite feeling like it never really started. In the end, Nightmare Alley sort of just exists. I put it above Belfast because at least it succeeds in creating a vibrant atmosphere visually, which Belfast doesn't. In short, looks incredible and Willem Dafoe is here, and that's all I can say about it. King Richard tells the story of how Serena and Venus Williams became the world-famous tennis players they are today, and their father Richard Williams, who plans their future successes. With King Richard, I think I have to start with the performances. Every performance in this is a home run, but if I had to choose a couple to talk about, it's gotta be Will Smith and Sanaa Sidney. These two own this movie with the performances that hold the narrative together. They are the through line of the story, and one of the reasons King Richard works as well as it does. Performances really carry this movie. King Richard is a tale as old as time biopic that does what most biopics do. It doesn't really break the mold, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Lots of movies follow some sort of formula, it's called story structure, but in the specific genre of biopic, it's a lot more noticeable. In a fictional story, it's easier to move aspects around and hide the formula a little better, but biopics really smack you in the face with them since the formula of the story follows the trajectory of a person's life. Start off as a nobody, go through trials and tribulations, end up as a somebody. King Richard does the same thing, but still manages to be largely enjoyable. Sometimes biopics can end up being too long or too complicated as the movie tries to cover every important moment of a person's life, leading to a final product that's just a little bit too messy. But I think King Richard manages to avoid that fate. Yes, it's not perfect, but for the most part, King Richard sticks to the point and doesn't overinflate the narrative with random fluff that slows the roll of the story. In the end, King Richard is inspiring, exciting, and heartwarming, even if it's not necessarily new. Coda follows 17-year-old Ruby, the only hearing member of a deaf family, as she juggles being a teenager and trying to pursue her own dreams with wanting to help her family keep their business afloat. Hanging over it all is her passion for music and singing, one thing her family can't relate to. I've just talked about formulaic stories, and I'm going to talk about them again. Coda is undoubtedly formulaic. It's a coming-of-age story we know all too well, with a relatable main character discovering who they are, going through difficult moments with their family and friends, and eventually fulfilling their needs and desires with a better understanding of themselves and the people important to them. Coda is also a tale as old as time, a story that we've all seen before. And you know what? I don't care. I don't care that Coda follows a well-known formula. I don't care that Coda doesn't break the mold or doesn't do anything really unique, because I'm a whore for a good coming-of-age movie, and Coda gets that part right. This movie knows what it is. Coda is a small, deeply personal story about a specific experience that is somehow also incredibly universal. Ruby's struggle between wanting to do what makes her happy and not wanting to leave her family and disappoint them is something a lot of people understand. Yes, we might not be in the specific situation of being a hearing member in a deaf family, but the actions and emotions portrayed on screen are deeply relatable. Above everything, Coda is about what it means to need a person. Both Ruby's family and Ruby herself need each other, and that mutual need hangs over the entire movie, from Ruby's role in the family's day-to-day life, to Ruby wanting to help the people she loves the most, to characters wanting to prove to other characters that they don't need them. Even the duet in the movie is about needing someone. Coda addresses how needing a person can be a beautiful but also daunting thing. So often, needing someone is associated with loving them, and while that's a fine sentiment, it doesn't have to be true. Learning that you don't necessarily need someone doesn't mean you love them any less. In the end, Coda hits in the exact right spot. It's incredibly heartwarming and fed my coming-of-age obsession. Coda's got it all: family, drama, friendship, young love, passions, and sweetness that'll leave you smiling, even if it's something we've seen before. West Side Story is a remake of the 1961 movie musical about a young man and woman from rival street gangs who fall in love, leading to heightened strife between the two sides. West Side Story is a classic. Before it was a beloved movie from the 60s, it was a stage musical, and before it was that, it was Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. West Side Story genuinely is a tale as old as time, as much as any story can be. Spielberg's remake is a vibrant explosion of life and color, taking an age-old story and breathing new life into it. With a remake like this, it's impossible not to compare it to the original, and I have to say that I think the 2021 West Side Story is better than the one from 1961. Obviously, technological advancements boost this movie up visually. West Side Story is a feast for the eyes. Spielberg leans into the environment of a movie musical, embracing a hyper-stylized version of New York that perfectly walks the line between realistic and dreamlike. The world reflects the feelings of new love, and you can't help but get swept away in it. I also found myself enjoying a lot of the musical numbers more than I did in the original. The remake uses more interesting and varied choreography, and the inclusion of actual Broadway stars elevates the performances to more impressive heights than the original. Some of the order of the musical numbers were changed, which made some of the context weaker in my opinion, but it's a small complaint for a musical as fun as this. West Side Story isn't a movie so much as it is a spectacle. This is the sort of film that reminds you how exciting movies can be. I enjoy quieter stories as much as the next person, but things like West Side Story get your body humming and heart beating. Things like West Side Story remind you you're alive, and for that alone, it deserves commendation. It might have been better if a certain someone wasn't in this though. I don't know about you, but I don't enjoy cringing because I have to look at a certain person who happens to be in almost every scene. Licorice Pizza follows Gary Valentine and Alana Kane as they navigate life and love in the 1970s. Now, right off the bat, I want to say that Alana and Gary shouldn't be in love. Let me make that very clear. Their 10-year age difference is not only strange, but also a little bit entirely illegal. You start off the movie feeling apprehensive about what you're watching, but as you continue on, that apprehension turns into something else. Because the truth is, I think their so-called love is the least important thing we're supposed to be seeing. I don't necessarily see this as a romantic love story. I see it more as a story of two people who are kind of lost, with no idea of what they're doing. One of them is a young, wide-eyed optimist trying to be a grown-up and trying to do something meaningful with his life even if he doesn't really know what that is yet, while the other is a grown-up who doesn't feel like one at all, someone with no self-confidence who has made an unfortunate habit of getting her worth from other people. They meet at just the right time and instantly understand each other, allowing them to form an inexplicable bond that transcends love, and I think that's the point. Licorice Pizza isn't so much about love as it is about human connection, which is why the structure it employs, scene after scene of random events happening to our characters, works so well, but I'll get to that in a second. Aside from the main relationship, Licorice Pizza is hilarious. This movie is funny in ways that you don't even realize going into it. Whether it's Gary poorly changing shirts in an audition, to Alana talking to an eclectic agent, to any scene including Bradley Cooper, Licorice Pizza sneaks up on you with its charming characters and mundane yet somehow absurd situations. It simultaneously doesn't take itself too seriously, while also knowing when to pull itself back and allow a softer and more grounded approach. Humor aside, Licorice Pizza is a movie about nothing, and I mean that in the best way possible. It feels like someone dared Paul Thomas Anderson to make a movie that was all vibes and no plot, and not only did he take the dare, but he chugged a bunch of Red Bull and, once on the caffeine high, wrote the most plotless, vibeful movie he could. Licorice Pizza isn't interested in having a plot. It's slice of life at its finest, following a couple of characters over a certain period of time and chronicling the things that happen to them, whether they be big or little. In this way, it really does feel like you're just watching the regular lives of these characters, and there's something very comforting about that. There are moments in this movie that are not important to a larger story, but are still included, something like Gary being mistaken for a murderer, or a random dinner Alana has with an agent, or one of my favorites, Gary and Alana installing a waterbed in Bradley Cooper's house. None of these events lead to a bigger story, and in any other movie, that would be bad. In any other movie, they wouldn't work. But in Licorice Pizza, they fill out this picture of a person's life. These things make the viewer sink into these characters' worlds and live along with them until they feel so familiar. And that familiarity, in combination with the nostalgic directing and cinematography and dreamy atmosphere, create an experience that feels like home. And I think that's the best way to describe this movie. Home. Something that inherently feels just right. Dune tells the story of Paul, the gifted young heir of House Atreides, as he and his family travel to the distant planet of Arrakis to oversee the production of spice, the most important resource known to man. But while there, powerful forces threaten the future of his people, and Paul finds himself swept up into a greater purpose. Similar to West Side Story, Dune is an absolute spectacle. Denis Villeneuve and Greg Fraser created a world that is so tangible. Every second of this is chock full of breathtaking visuals that are so closely linked with this world that I couldn't imagine it looking in any other way, or this specific imagery being used in any other story. Add in Hans Zimmer's masterful score, which brings the world to life audibly with its specific sounds and intricacies, and you've got an experience that is uniquely Dune. Something like Dune is made to be seen in a pitch-black room on the biggest screen you can find, with the sound battering your body from all sides. Dune is a movie that takes its time to unravel its story. While it has its fair share of exciting action and battle, it also makes sure to dig into the lore it has to offer, putting emphasis on the methodical world building. As someone who hadn't read the book or seen any of the other adaptations, I didn't have much trouble following along with the story, and that's a feat for something as large and easily convoluted as Dune. It would have been easy to mess this up, what with all the different planets and races and groups of characters, with all of their different significances, motivations, and plot lines that you have to keep straight, which makes it all the more impressive that the movie managed to not only avoid a disaster, but also to create a narrative that's efficient and succinct while still being entertaining. Seriously, this movie is expertly written, and add on top of that this cast? It's no wonder the performances are as strong as they are. I mean, it seems like half of Hollywood is in Dune. Timothée Chalamet, Oscar Isaac, Rebecca Ferguson, Zendaya, Jason Momoa, Javier Bardem, Dave Bautista, Josh Brolin, it's insane. Okay, I'm about to make a comparison that only a specific portion of people watching this will understand, but here goes. The cast of Dune is like the cast of Kabhi Khushi Kabhie Gham. That's all I'm gonna say. If you get it, you get it. This level of star power speaks for itself. As a lover of fantasy and a tolerator of sci-fi, Dune scratches an itch for me, one caused by an inexplicable love for stories that are high concept, with high risks and high rewards. I know I keep saying this, and honestly, if you know me at all, then it's a given, but there is very little I enjoy more in this world than a slow yet powerful gut punch of a story, as you'll see in the next few minutes of this video. But there's also something really special about a huge story with the highest stakes that hits you in the right spot, and Dune does that. Despite its scale, it never feels inaccessible or too much. It feels like another big story made small for the average viewer to enjoy. And this phenomenon is something we know well by now. There's a reason the hero's journey is such a beloved way to tell a story, but knowing it and seeing it are different, and Dune reminds me why it's so known. Even though this is only the first installment in a series I can only imagine will reach higher heights, it already feels like a home run, like something that, in the coming years, will join the greats on the shelf of timeless classics. The Power of the Dog follows a domineering ranger and the cruelty he imposes on his brother's new wife and stepson. The Power of the Dog unravels slowly and surely. It tests your patience with its viscous narrative, while never tipping into the realm of boring or uninteresting. The movie perfectly maneuvers slow and steady with gripping and enthralling. With its heavy, deliberate directing and stunning cinematography, The Power of the Dog evokes the sense that you're watching something both weirdly familiar, yet alien and dark play out in front of you. And that makes sense to me, seeing as the movie takes behaviors that we know well and twists them into something much more gross. The performances in this movie are nothing short of phenomenal, and that's from everyone. Kirsten Dunst plays a haunting depiction of an inherently good-hearted woman whose mental health slowly deteriorates. Jesse Plemons' caring and level-headed gentleman is such a great foil to Benedict Cumberbatch's often intimidating and unapproachable rancher. And Cody Smith-McPhee does an incredible job as a young, seemingly sweet and innocent teenager who's really hiding layers of intelligence and manipulation. Watching this film is falling into a completely different world, one that's so tangible you can feel it resonating in you. The strong performances boost up what this movie really is, which is a deep character study of the man Phil Burbank. This intimidating rancher is so sure of who he is and his place in the world, but is simultaneously always on the verge of crumbling. If there is even a second of doubt on him or pushback against him, he retaliates in the most aggressive and toxic way possible. As the film continues, we learn about this man and why he is the way he is, and how the trajectory of his life and what he wants to portray himself as is actually somewhat pitiable. Because while The Power of the Dog is a study of Phil Burbank, it's also a methodical study of masculinity, the way it manifests in different people, and the question of what masculinity even is. Someone who presents himself as the all-American man's man can sound like a good and honorable thing, but in practice ends up being nothing more than a defensive, insecure bully who torments others to prove to himself that he's on the top of the food chain. A shy, wide-eyed mama's boy can be seen as cute and harmless, endearing even, but he can also stoop to the level of other people and even lower to get what he wants. The kinds of masculinity presented in The Power of the Dog is an intriguing dichotomy that even people today don't always understand. Everyone in The Power of the Dog is playing a game where they get exactly what they want and end up on top if they win. Some only play because they're forced into it, and others play without even realizing it since they have no ulterior motives. Others still make the game their life, going head-to-head with each other to assert their dominance. After all, losing this game is the most beta male move. The Power of the Dog is a subtle battle of ego and power, of strong personalities going up against each other in ways that are both strangely understandable, yet off-the-rails insane. The film is a deliberate unraveling of these characters in a stunning yet haunting backdrop, with twists so subtle you don't even realize they've happened until the credits are rolling. Drive My Car follows a theater director who, after the unexpected death of his wife, forms a bond with his driver. The thing about Drive My Car is that it sort of sneaks up on you. I think it was the last one of the Best Picture nominees that I watched, and in the span of 3 hours, it shot to the top of my list so unexpectedly, yet so surely. Drive My Car is long and slow, but never once does that feel unnecessary. In fact, its runtime is used so effectively that an entire detailed prologue of our main character's life is shown to us before the opening credits play, a period of time that maybe feels like 20 minutes, but in actuality is 40. There is something to be said about a movie that can take its daunting runtime of 3 hours and present it in a way where you as a viewer don't feel the minutes slipping by at all. Rather, you get sucked into the world of the movie, one that, on the outside, doesn't seem like anything special, but actually is like an old friend holding their arms out for a hug. It is so easy to fall into this movie, to lose yourself in the world that is a reflection of our own, and the cast of characters that are both eclectic yet painfully and presently real. Drive My Car makes you forget you're even watching a movie. Instead, it feels like you're talking to a number of people that all have something to say, that are interesting in their own ways. Drive My Car puts importance on the little things, the tiny details about people and situations that just are. It presents us to things that are both familiar and unknowable, intriguing and confusing, and the movie itself follows its own philosophy. Drive My Car focuses on tiny moments. It's not big or flashy. It's a deconstruction of human nature. It asks questions about the often inexplicable parts of human life, both the good and the bad, and it does so in a way that would have been very easy to get wrong. Some of the movie's highlights are the long monologues, where one character just talks to another one for minutes on end. These monologues could have alienated audiences and left them wanting to move on, but the incredible writing in combination with such impeccable performances from an all-star cast end up making them so gripping that it's a shock when they end. Drive My Car is not afraid to make the audience listen to its questions and attempt at answers. It's a complex, twisted study of grief, of regret, of suffering, of the release of death and the pain of living, and of human connections, ones that are both good and bad. It explores intangible ideas, like knowing you love someone but also not knowing why sometimes you hate them, or why it's possible to be drawn to another person when you know it's not in your best interests. It does all of that while capturing you visually too. There's something about the simple yet gripping directing that enhances this reflection of our world and makes it that much easier to get lost in. And wow, the cinematography. There are a couple movie shots that, when I see them, hit me with an inexplicable mountain of motion, whether it be the lovely night scene in La La Land, or the silhouettes in Catching Fire, or this. And I have to say that the shot of our main characters smoking out of the sunroof in Drive My Car is the newest addition to that list. I don't mean to be dramatic, but there is something about this shot that just makes me want to cry. I don't know what it is, whether it's the melancholy, or the comfort, or the safety, or the moment of reprieve that it represents, but this shot changed my life and I'm a different person now. Don't fight me on this, go argue with the wall. I understand that Drive My Car is not going to be for everyone. It's intimidating for sure. Between its runtime and its subject matter, it's not an easy movie to just put on, and that can scare people away from ever watching it. But if anything I said speaks to you even a little bit, I highly encourage you to seek this out. I promise you that it's worth it. This movie knows exactly what it's doing. Drive My Car is truly an all-timer. And there you have it. That was my official ranking of the 2022 Academy Award Best Picture nominees. Out of them all, I think The Power of the Dog would have the best chance of winning and would deserve it as well, but we won't know until that envelope is opened. Whenever I make one of these, I feel the need to remind everyone and myself that award shows are inherently flawed, overly planned out, and in the grand scheme of things are not the end-all be-all of whether or not a movie is good, clearly. And if you somehow manage to avoid the insanity that ensues with these things, then you're just a stronger person than I am. Having said that, thanks for watching. I'll see you again with one of these next year.